All right, now we're recording. Okay. All right, so today we are doing chapter 2 of Caliban and the
Chapter
Witch.
1.
Chapter 1. Oh, yeah, because we did the preface and the introduction. Fucking this up already. Yeah, so Caliban and the Witch by Silvia Federici, and this chapter is called All the World Needs a Jolt. All right. And let me just read like the first 3 lines here. Again, I have chapter 42 here says, sorry, page 42 in the introduction. And I thought there was 2 sections in this first paragraph. They can open up conversations or talks. She says here, I guess the first claim is a history of women and reproduction in the transition to capitalism must begin with the struggle that European medieval proletariat, small peasants, artisans, day labor, wage against feudal power in all its form. I feel like that's a very good sentence that engulfs the whole chapter. And as I was like describing the whole book to someone, I was saying that the periodization of the book is very important because it's not in feudalism or it's capitalism or it's that long view, that the 13th century view that someone like Wood, I was talking to James, takes of, okay, you need to, in order to look at this transition from feudalism to capitalism or class analysis, you start from even like 12th and 11th century. Like at school, 13th century was like the earliest, like that even like Sager was talking about, that was blowing my mind up. Anyway, so that's our kind of time period. And then you have this figure of the women, and what she wants to do is to say that there are all these classes or like collection of subclasses or affiliates alongside major classes, and they're all in this kind of uneven power struggle, and they switch roles. Anyway, so that's kind of our the condition that we want to start this story from.
Yeah, that's a good word too, because I was thinking of that sentence in another way, that it must begin at the bottom, from the people, from the workers, from the proletariat, the medieval proletariat, and what kind of groups that would consist of. And it is a lot of ways fitted in a kind of Marxist view of the history being the conflict between classes and how it plays out in this time, in the medieval time.
Yeah. I mean that's kind of always, it's the works that trying to say that, hey, I'm going to do a Marxist analysis of certain subject or whatever, but also I'm going to like at every point demonstrate that Marxism as a tool of like historical analysis is apt for the task, which then kind of binds you in certain like obligations. That always, and I'm not judging it. It's just always like I find it interesting. It's a lot of kind of responsibility once you start working in that.
Yeah, I think what the author does well, is kind of base it in that Marxist understanding of history on not on a history of ideas, like not that these ideas of the heretics changed the underlying material conditions, but that the base kind of influence the superstructure. But there's we can get into like what that whole thing is, but I think the superstructure can influence back into the base, but it starts from the change in material conditions causing these ideological, social, cultural changes.
Yeah, I think she also wants to, like she outlines more in the introduction, she wants to utilize some of the uniquely Marxist material and historical analysis tools without being beholden entirely to Marxism, because I think that the framework she's coming from is that Marxism is a technology of capitalism, is like is still bound within a capitalist logic, and so it's well, the line at the bottom of that paragraph, capitalism was the counter-revolution that destroyed the possibilities which had emerged from the anti-feudal struggle, which I think is functionally the thesis of the whole book, is a reason why she doesn't want to be solely Marxist or solely Foucauldian, whatever. You know, I don't think she wants to be married to the legacy that capitalism is.
Yeah, I really like that you read that, and I think yeah, two things. I think you're right, but I think it's in maybe like there is even another way of looking at that, especially that line you read. It's the idea of okay, so what is one of the worst derogatory like accusations? I guess not derogatory. I don't know what to do. What is one of the accusations against Marxists? Not from too outside, a little bit from the people who are like in with the jargons and the lingo and the logic, is that, look, it's too deterministic, right? And I understand there's variety of arguments from the Marxist side to kind of push that accusation off and whatnot, but I guess she said to herself, I can imagine that rather than writing a chapter about all those like abstract debates, as like Perry Anderson write a whole book, you know, like uh, contending Marxist ideas in England, you know, and it's like too long already. But she's saying that she's saying it another way. She's saying that, look, like other futures were possible, right? Like I'm going to use historical materialism. I'm going to use class conflict, of course. I'm going to use Bayesian superstructure, these analyses, but I also want to say that capitalism did not need to happen, which I think is like, I don't know. It's it reminds me of that four futures that James you mentioned last episode, but in a different way. This time not so apocalyptic. Yeah.
Yeah,
Anyways,
I think that's the Marx Foucault kind of synthesis there, building on Marx's ideas and analysis, but using Foucault, like we talked about this last time too, like Foucault's idea that the thing has a birth, it has a death. So like all these structures, all these institutions.
Right. They have like a
Like an origin story almost that
right. Yeah,
it
no,
could
I
have
think
gone a
that's
different
right.
way.
Yeah,
You know?
it's origin story, because they're still chimeric. They still come from something. They're not like created out of nowhere, which is where I think like Agamben's critique of Foucault kind of falls flat. But they are
He's a little wacky these days, right? He's like an
Yeah.
anti-vaxxer and stuff.
Sure.
But I want to extend the comic book thing. Like it's an origin story, but there's like the idea of a what if, you know, Peter Parker wasn't bitten by a spider? What if Superman landed in Soviet Russia? You know, these other kind of possibilities.
What if we took the basic archetype of Spider-Man and mapped it onto endless symbiotes and, you know, told the story in a new way, right? And I'm not saying that's a negative thing either. Like I like Venom. It's a good character.
all right.
It is still like a, you know, Peter Parker clone.
Yeah, it's got a point.
He's
Peter Parker,
angry.
bad boy.
Yeah, comes here differently.
Yeah, and you know, reading this chapter, I didn't see, not to stall on this one fucking paragraph for too long, but I just thought it was like an interesting thing to smuggle inside your thesis. Maybe it rears its head later on down in other chapters, but Yeah, so James, another thing we talked about was that idea. I really like what you were saying about the base and superstructure. But I'm writing this other paper right now, and I was just like, I'm reading this whole book about base and superstructure, but the guy is writing about how it's like a bad model of thinking. Anyways, maybe we should briefly explain these because we're assuming that people who are reading this have not read any other book. Just
Except the Bible, like every American is.
yeah, well versed in both Greek and Old Hebrew version. Yeah, do you want to do it? Should I do it? Whatever.
You do it because I don't remember what you said you were going to do.
Oh, sorry. The base and superstructure.
Yeah, okay.
It's. I'm gonna give you the simplest form that I would use. Base. For the base, you look at the material logic of production in any society, right? Like, is it a type of production where it's connected to wage labor, and there's a capitalist and he brings in you and the raw material and puts out a commodity that only belongs to him, which then goes to the market, blah, blah, blah. Is it a feudal one that you work the land, you're not getting a wage, but you have certain rights and norms, and we go to actual characteristic of these epochs? That would be your base. You want to think what's happening around those mechanisms of production in each period at a specific time in history, and the superstructure would be the kind of the world of ideas, right? The world of institutions, the world of derivative emanations of that particular mode of structure. For example, one of the aspects of the superstructure would be its laws. And what kind of laws under capitalism? Contract, property. There is, even in your criminal law, you have vernacular that talks about like paying your debt to society after a certain crime. So things started shaping up based on that base. But one thing, the most important thing that James said, I think that is not talked about, is that superstructure then responds to the base, because it's a human world. Things are evolving. Ideas evolve based on human interaction with the world, blah, blah. Right? So that's the kind of a jargon we use for base and superstructure. Okay, so what do you guys want to talk about next? Where do you want to go from here? Got in that paragraph after that, James, what do you have for page 43? What do you have a different number?
For the first page of the introduction is page 21.
So
Or the first page of chapter 1 is page 21.
Okay, mine is all messed up. Okay, so do you guys have something you've lined up, or?
Yeah, I mean, I could say sort of continuing with the previous statement of capitalism was the counter-revolution is
Yeah,
sort of driving that home. The finishing or the end of that paragraph where it says this much must be stressed. For the belief that capitalism evolved from feudalism and represents a higher form of social life has not yet been dispelled.
oh shit, yeah.
The sort of the myth-making endeavor that is so crucial to capitalism, that there's a lot in this book that really is important, that should recontextualize our understanding of history, that should really allow us to see a through line between Christendom, Europeanness, manifest destiny, and contemporary whiteness. There's lots of like lessons to be found in this, but if nothing else, just dispelling this notion that capitalism represents progress at all would be enough.
Yeah, and that in two sense, right? There's like the material improvement, sure, like, you know, we used to have forks, now we have, I don't know, tunnels under Las Vegas that take only one cars, one car at a time or whatever. I mean, there are those types of development or evolution, but when we generally say evolution, and what Mark is referring to and what Federici, I believe, is pointing into, is that kind of that reinvigorated thought in Germany that they got from the Greeks, or it comes in and out. I mean, the Arabs, kind of Islamic civilization, had that belief too for a bit of evolving history, right? That, and what does that mean? It's that not only life gets better because of material the evolution, specifically technology, but our ideas also get better, more refined, but also more towards, and this is by the time we're reaching Enlightenment, before Enlightenment with Hegel, that actually the history itself is culminating towards freedom, or the realization of, and I think Marx, of course, in the beginning was a Hegelian, he's turning it around, blah, 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 blah. But I believe that Federici here is more concerned about certain Marxists. And then, but I think that idea is everywhere, even outside Marxism, right?
Yeah, I was thinking of accelerationists as a whole, but I wanted to think about or ask about, yeah, get back, like more on that, the word evolved, because what that word is kind of fraught with meaning. Like there's the scientific, there's Lamarckian, there's just a kind of general idea of it. So
There's a lot of
yeah,
Darwinian underpinnings, and then there's of course the like inherent teleology that is usually some form of divinity minus God.
and she does go to social Darwinism like earlier, right in the introduction. So something there she's playing with. And also like, yeah, how can we extrapolate this into thinking about, will capitalism evolve, the belief that capitalism will evolve into some kind of communism or socialism,
Sure.
or that kind of faith?
Yeah,
Accelerationists and like the kind of Marxist Leninist, more Stalinist people.
I think something that is like, I think a good example of it, it was for like I've taught on this, like this idea of like, okay, you're in history, people will say that, okay, women have more rights in the development of history. Like knowing like 200 years of history, like good, in not like actually have studied history, even knowing 200 years of it would dispel you of that idea, right? For example, you know, like I was thinking about this very fast transition in Iran, like leading up to 1979 of revolution, and the rapid modernization that happened before it, and after, right? And there was this idea that going to the cities would, for some women, would equal more freedom. But when you look at the division of labor and gendered relations and familial relations and laws and norms, that in actually the view of the field is more equal than the view of the office 20 years later, right? Because you're in a village, you're in a field, whoever that can work has to go work. You have this amount of time to put the shit in the ground. You have this amount of time to take stuff out. You know, if you happen to have not, you know, had birth enough sons, you still take it, like whoever comes goes and does the work, right? But with the like when you, with the advancement of like management in modernity, especially in the life of the bourgeoisie, suddenly those relations are codified, and they have norms, and they are inherently unequal because they're defined as such, right? Historically. So I also like, I guess if you're reading, if you're thinking, oh, I'm reading a book about Marxism and feminism, that also occurred to me of evolution. Yeah. Boom. Mic drop.
Yeah.
Mind's blown. YouTube
No,
bleeding.
yeah, I was just thinking of how to formulate a response.
Okay. Yeah, so I have here, I should have we gotten
Yeah.
to?
Yeah, well, I got one now. Like, yeah, I
Okay.
think that's kind of the larger project of the book, to kind of explain that. Well, really, like, partly to kind of like describe like the actual history of women's work in this period, and because we all grew up in a time when the women do certain jobs, men do certain ones, and it's kind of changing, but it's not quite
Yeah.
completely equalized. And this isn't some kind of like natural divine law. This was something that was instituted. These are kind of things that came about.
Yeah.
Why did that happen? And what explanations could we offer, or what explanations are offered, kind of ideological explanations? Oh, women have children, so they have to take maternal leave, and that would, and you're like, that, I don't know if that explanation, if you think about it for more than a few minutes, doesn't really hold water. Like, why would this matter to like early capitalists that much?
Yeah.
They'd be like, just have your baby in the factory and get back to work. Like, so I think her explanation is to me more something about women's knowledge, women's like women's role as the witch,
Mhm.
and wanting to suppress that, and women's role in the anti-feudal struggle.
Yeah, and in relation to the feudal struggle, here she says it is in the course of the anti-feudal struggle that we find the first evidence in European history of a grassroots women's movement opposed to the established order and contributing to the construction of alternative models of communal life. This is very important for reading that last section. Struggle against feudal power also produced the first organized attempts to challenge the dominant sexual norms and establish more egalitarian relations between women and men. So there is, as an Italian, there is a little original sin narrative to the story, because there is something beautiful that was lost. Or we can be more kind and call it romantic, and not to say it's wrong or correct or anything, but there is this disposition. She's taken a certain position towards history.
I think it's counter to the idea that capitalism is a higher form, like everyone's better off, to say, well, no, we fell from grace. Like, no, it's kind of different, and maybe worse in some ways. Feudalism, she mentions at some point that it wasn't like perfect or great or anything necessarily. It might have been the material conditions were set up differently.
Of course.
Kind of analytic mode.
Yeah, I mean, I suspect that the end period of feudalism, sort of the late stage of manorialism, is the part that you would be calling potentially positive, but only because the what do you call it? The gains that have what do you call it when you have a return on investment, effectively, like the gains that have started to pay out greater dividends than the labor that's gone into them.
Oh, right.
over the course of like 200 plus years of feudal struggle, are leading to a state where, you know, I mean, there's the block quotes in this book, there's plenty of hilarious ones where it's, you know, citing some old lord who's talking about, you know, these peasants, they don't even want to work anymore, you know.
Too rich.
They want to tell us how much our rent should be and that kind of stuff. I'm like, yeah, you are correct. Your analysis is on point.
I love that the script hasn't changed since 12th century.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, yeah, and on that very note, and I think this transitions us to this next section, serfdom as a class relation. She says that instead of what we could have got based on these legitimate proletarian women's movement, you get English closures, colonialism, witch trials, and I put here biopolitics, but she says reproduction, which is kind of like the thesis of this book. But there is, I put biopolitics because of this, and I put it later on because as I was reading, I noticed that one of the points she wants to make, and we'll get to it some other time, that one aspect of this transition out of feudalism is that the state takes the mantle of managing reproduction, just anything that has to do with sex and life, and of course death. So that's what I put, but that's it. So we get this other world. So now that she's kind of set it up, we go to why then serfdom is a class relation. Right. And you know, we can go through these, just talk about whatever you think is important, because we don't, you know, we can give like little snapshots of.
Yeah, I do just want to say I agree that it is about biopower and biopolitics quite often. I think both the part you're talking about and the part where it talks about the burghers closing ranks with the nobility is a form of sort of biopower. And then later on, the sort of talking about how playing the sex card helped the state to discipline and divide the medieval proletariat. I think this is like the first tool. And I think that, you know, capitalism is a very robust system in why it's so capable of permuting and adapting is because it's like an ideology of atavism where it's very happy to pull from to learn from history, to learn from the Athenian like hegemony and the notions of citizen in order to reinvent that concept as race and enshrine that to make a racialized subject that can be enslaved, instead of, you know, what starts as where is this, something like 1376 when Florence is allowed to resume trading in slaves, and then less than 100 years later we have Genoa being the like enslaving capital of the Mediterranean, and they've developed a super robust system to be able to classify slaves, because slaves are bought by mail order primarily. And then the matters of ascription that they describe to people are, and this is at a point when slaves are usually not, they're usually Eastern European at this moment, and becoming North African. And this is before the West African coast is really the like prime source of it. But where you have slave-like just becomes the Genoese descriptors of what slaves looked like. And, you know, it starts as this like, as this momentary return to slavery from a lack of access to free or cheap labor. And then over time, it just borrows pieces here and there from history to prop itself up until it does it long enough. It's never actually about being coherent or consistent or making sense. It's about drawing out the argument long enough until people forget where you started, and then you can just sort of like file off the serial numbers. It's self-justifying by virtue of the fact that we don't live forever.
Yeah, and also I like that, and I wanted to connect it to the base superstructure idea, because I think the base is like chugging along according to like the brutal capitalist logic and necessity, needing workers to maximize your profit. And the superstructure kind of is on a different time. Like it can stretch back to these ideas from the past, bring them in. And yeah, and I think what drives that, what keeps, like you're talking toward the end, like what keeps that, its stability and its long lasting, these kind of ideas that are outside time. And you would think like, why are we drawing on these ancient ideas? Because of the underlying base necessity and the driving needs there. Because that always becomes explanation. Well, we have to do this because, you know, if we didn't, like the economy would collapse or something.
Yeah, and I mean it's weird because then it's also a true proposition. I mean it's false, but it's true because yes, the lower classes are like attached to this economy, and even the classless people, be the immigrant or whatever may you, that it does affect you to a point of I mean, you know, I was thinking about like the housing bubble, and the subsequent crash of economy, like 2007 to 2008. I mean, like I'm thinking about, you know, I always think about like Obama's options, you know, because on one end you're like, why did you like bail these people out? And Obama, of course, we're just using that as shorthand for majority consensus in government. But on the other hand, like, you know, it's the corny statistic from The Big Short. You know, it's like every time you know, unemployment goes like a percentage up, like 20,000 people die or something, you know. And then think about what those numbers would have been, arguably for a short period, but long enough to decimate. And who would it decimate first? So in a sense, yeah, it's the woman who's made it like in the echelons of like a corporate world, you know, to suddenly ask her to, you know, hey, have you read Bell Hooks or something? It's like, no, and I don't want to. Like, I'm not going to challenge my own existence based on 1, 2, 3. Or anyways, I guess I'm trying to make the point that it's both killing you and also you need to subsist it to keep you alive. It's
Paris. It's like it's venom basically. It was actually venom. Yeah, but no, yeah, and not even just. I just wanted to like, yeah, I love that, and wanted to add on, not even just economic kind of threats, like your social, cultural, like, be like, hey, I'm a Marxist now, I'm an anarchist or whatever, communist, and you know, your friends are gonna be like, your rich business, middle class business friends are gonna be like, I'm not gonna invite you to the country club anymore.
right.
Just you're probably better off, but it's not for not everyone. I mean, we shouldn't even ask people to have to be that brave to have to make a better world.
Sure.
But it requires that, I think.
Yeah, I mean, I think one the other thing that capitalism is very good at, and not just uniquely capitalism, I mean, this is sort of like what it is to be a hegemonic system of control, is to totally disguise your death toll, so that you can say, like, 0.5% raise of unemployment means 10,000 people dead, and it's going to raise 50%, so that's going to be however many people, right? And don't do math while streaming, that's a bad idea. But it's going to kill so many people, you can't do that. But then the return to the norm is legitimately to kill a much greater number of people, and to dispossess virtually everyone and destroy virtually everyone. But it's like some bare form of subsistence that we have accepted. So it's the benchmark that we compare everything against.
Yeah, and that's a good point. Like, capitalism running normally isn't like neutral and is responsible for millions of deaths here. I don't know the calculations now. If you include like everything that you usually include when they say, oh, communism killed so many people. You include all those things in the capitalist world, yeah, you get a lot.
Yeah. So
I really
yes.
didn't highlight a lot in this chapter till we get to, what section is this?
Well, we can describe serfdom here because we got to briefly kind of mention slavery and talk about.
I started highlighting in the millenarian and heretic movements, but yeah, we should.
Okay.
just-
Yeah, but just real quick here. It's just so here she says, she starts really, serfdom developed in Europe between 5th, 7th centuries AD in response to the breakdown of the slave system on which the economy of imperial Rome had been built. It was a result of two related phenomena. Actually, I don't want to read all that. Let's see here. Was slave okay? So when we go to feudalism, the idea is that you want to get rid of that notion of slavery that you've dealt with in the previous one, and we got to talk about this word slavery. When we say slavery, there's a slavery that was persisted in Athens when Aristotle is writing, or there's one that is is a Mongol harem. Then there is one. The point I want to make, without making all kinds of examples, is that slavery are very different. They're very different, but more importantly, the slavery that we talk about in the age before feudalism has nothing to do with the slavery that the transatlantic slavery that we're going to talk about, mention in other parts of this discussion.
Yeah, one of the things that is meaningfully different about slavery in antiquity,
much better than slavery in the United States in 19th century.
Well, I think that whether or not it's better or worse, it does seem, that's almost an argument I don't want to do, but I would
don't
say,
do it.
There's a really meaningful difference in before, like, banking is a thing, is a real potent world power, and that's that slavery in antiquity is a lack of access to bankruptcy. That debt is a technology of liberating the hoard of wealth, not like the invading horde, but like, I've got a giant Scrooge McDuck mansion vault full of gold, and it's just sitting there doing nothing. Loaning it out is dangerous when the primary Babylonian method of contending with wealth was to forgive it all, or with debt was to forgive it whenever a new king stepped in. And oftentimes when the debt got bad enough, a king died and a new one came into place.
Yeah. Jubilee all over history. Yeah.
Yeah. And so in order to mobilize that hoard of wealth, having a class of people who are not able to access insolvency, who, if they go into too much debt, their freedom is forfeit. It is more of an economic relationship than it is in the like transatlantic chattel slave mode, where it is so much, it is like a backbone of understanding of understanding what it is to be a colonial power, what it is to be a great power, what it is to be white, what it is to be sort of in charge of the world. And those parts are just not meaningfully connected in history, in antiquity.
Yeah, yeah, and there is and just there's, I guess, you know, when I made the comment about like the comparative comment, and I think about all these, you know, historical examples of it. No, some of it, you know, clearly put out. Like, look at the way slaves are in Plato's writings. Like, imagine if that behavior was done, you know, like in Georgia, right, between a master and slave. Unfucking believable. But aside from that is that conditions of freedom being available, or you could be free and then go into slavery and then come out, or, you know, have these different forms of it. You could be paid, blah blah blah. And of course, in the United States, you have some of those patterns. You can go from being free into slavery and all that. And free, I mean, after you've been here, not your like natural condition as a human being. Yeah, just a lot more brutal, but also I can never think about, I have this kind of unsubstantiated thought in my head that if it was not for transatlantic slavery, like capitalism would have eaten itself out.
Absolutely.
Like it would have used itself out immediately. Like you just needed this. It's crazy to read these cases and look at the population numbers in these states in the United States, where there are more Black people than there are this, you know, the white people there.
Yeah, and having the United States there as this kind of free, empty land, quote, like not really, of course, this
Right.
kind of archaeological place where they could have these, like grow cotton and then ship it to England and use the north for the industrial, have this kind of system set up.
Yeah, and also just like building it, you know, and then of course it goes to railroad and all that stuff. So yeah, I guess yeah. Anyway, so it's because sometimes we cast these kind of characteristics of our world into the past, you know, when we talk about like the pyramids, you know, any fictional or non-fictional work you see of reenactments, there are slaves being whipped, you know, and they're like, oh, better build this fucking pyramid. It's like, rather than being like, look, at the bottom of those places, there are cities, like there are cemeteries, there are names of these workers, there are like, anyways, yeah, I feel like the brutality of our time is anyways, too much.
Yeah, and the rest of that chapter, which he goes on to say those two related phenomena.
Oh yeah, that like survive.
Giving the former slaves, the Roman slaves, like some land. So giving them a little bit of a boost, but also pushing down the free agricultural workers, kind of harmonizing their status, but kind of, you know, so going against this idea that, like, you know, this is an evolution from the previous economic system.
Yeah, because because she says, in a sense, this form of slavery that we are seeing in antiquity, you know, cannot exist in feudalism, right? It is a concept that ceases to exist. Now, of course, it's these slavery is still practiced, blah 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 blah. When we talk about these historical movements, breaks, but as a concept, it starts breaking down as a legal social concept, and then comes to serve. But she says that from this passage, two kind of mechanisms remain. One is customary agreement, and the other is that existing manner rules, and manners are the kind of the fields that these feudal now peasants move into, right? And then there is that the understanding between the manor and the peasants. It is just like a customary agreement, which I work the land, have enough for my subsistence. The rest I give to you, manor aristocrat. What will it be? You trade that for wealth, some of it for charity. There's no exchange of money, even though she's, yeah.
Yeah, and it makes me think of like the corresponding base superstructure there. You have that, which is the base of the feudal
course.
system, and then the superstructure be like, I'm divine right of kings, and I'm the cousin of the king, and
Well, also
I'm married to his
other cousin.
his sister cousin, and they're all bred anyway.
Yeah. There's also the feudal compact is at least rhetorically bidirectional, right? It's not just the I will defend you against brigands notion that is supposed to be the like manners charge, but also that I will build a city around you, because they are operating as the bank, they are operating as the mobilizer of like public works, things like that, is at least theoretically supposed to be why they are just like the contemporary boss is supposed to be justified in taking the surplus value from the worker, because they will bear all of the risk should there be a market collapse, right? As we see so profoundly, obviously, with COVID and landlords. I don't suspect that historically they lived up to the compact very often, but part of the superstructure is the compact itself is supposed to be a paternal relationship with the serf.
Yeah, and it's the form of it is coercion. The content of it is agreement, as I kind of like to think about it, because because the relations are not as John Rawls would have us to see when we talk about men in abstractions. But here she also wants to remain for us the commons. So there are unoccupied lands which hold meadows and whatnot, and then there are kind of unlanded peasants that are frequenting between that. One thing that happens in this time, and we're in the 11th, 12th century, is that there is this relative autonomy, plus I wrote here. Yeah, so the peasants, so one thing from Marxist theory is that, and this is like real, this is Marx, is that consciousness, the theory of consciousness for Marx starts with when and this comes from Feuerbach, of course, is when humanity is involved with the physical world. When consciousness tries to exert itself on a piece of clay or a stick or earth, that's the moment of consciousness for Marx. And Federici here says that when the peasants are working this land in this agreement and in this relative autonomy, because as long as you're in land, and you need each other, by the way. James and I talked about this in the last episodes that
we need each other.
That we need each other. No, that the peasant and the Lord need each other, because the Lord has this wonderful leisurely life that he sits around and does fuck all. You work the land and you're fine because you're not outside the field in the wild, which is, you can be haunted or God knows what will happen to you unless you go start building your own
work for yourself.
Yeah, if but you'll be also outside of protection.
Yeah.
So you develop this form of consciousness that you become develop this kinship between you and the land, and Marx, Federici here wants to say that that's when these ideas of land ownership and property start to evolve to a new form. And with those ideas, of course, come value judgments of equity, equality and justice and stuff like that, right? And you start to recognize your relationship, the relationship between you and the Lord. Of course, she's saying that she's setting you up. We're 500 years before this event, before revolutions start to change. But this is the seed is already in there, because she's thinking dialectically, of course. Yeah.
I wanted to go back to the consciousness, Marx's view of consciousness, and expand on that, because his idea, right, was that separates us from animal, and I find this a little problematic as an animal lover. But yeah, whether or not animals can do this might be debated, but that people can view something in their mind, like have an idea of something, then create it, not just doing the work, because that's what capitalism breaks us
Capital
down.
One, the bee example is what you're talking about. Yeah. Tell us.
Capitalism, well, yeah, the bees can build the beehive, but only humans can think of a beehive first and then want to build it, or a birdhouse or something.
He's right.
Capitalism comes and turns the worker into just an extension of the machine, to not think, because you're so separated from what you're making, unlike the situation you're talking about of the person working the land. You're making some gear that goes into a machine. You're not thinking about this thing you're making. You're not kind of being exercising your full human consciousness in that sense.
Yeah.
And I think in the commons, to bring it back there too,
well, talk about the field too.
People had the idea of what this could be. She pushes back against this idea of the tragedy of the commons, that we can't have nice things because there's always some
human nature,
fake stuff, yeah. Whereas she's saying no, it worked out fine for a while until the enclosures. But I think another result, a psychological result of capitalism, is that kind of degradation of consciousness. So
but what about feudalism?
Does become true, because now people have become profit motivated.
That's true, but I think what's important in this section is consciousness under feudalism, right? I mean, because you have relative autonomy, I mean, as a to be fair, to compare to urban life, I mean, yes,
No, I don't think that requires a whole lot of justification. I mean, there wasn't.
Okay.
It was. I think it's obvious that there was a massive resistance to the urbanization efforts. And there's a reason for that.
Yeah. And I'm thinking between then and now, I mean, Jesus, I mean, farm life, there is just so much things to do, and so for such a period. And that's all you could do. Of course, the intensity, but yeah, that you're saying it's kind of it's true as is.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think we need to like
Yeah.
strongly naturalize it, but it, I think otherwise we're left with just the sort of dumb redneck argument of all the villains didn't want to VILLEINS don't want to urbanize because they're just too dumb to realize how much it's in their best interest, and that's actually why we need the feudal lord, because they need to like pull the peasant along by the nose in order to get them into the future that they need, right? Like that is one of the myth making parts of capitalism, and it's not true. I mean, think it just because these peasants are uneducated doesn't mean that they aren't capable of like assessing for themselves.
Yeah, yeah.
Economy,
But
and
I
recognizing the value in that.
And can people choose to be worse off or not be better off at least? Like, where does like freedom come into this?
no, I
Sure.
mean, I guess I'm trying to look at it as
Even if it
Hegel
were
would,
true.
as Marx would, or as Federici, right? And I mean, she even uses master-slave dialectic. I think for them, and maybe I sign up to that, and I don't think it's naturalization. It's this idea that I mean, whatever, you were in all those classes. I had to explain it to you that consciousness comes out of conflict.
Sure.
And not overcoming the conflict means you don't get to grow.
Sure.
And I don't, yeah, and I guess that does interpret in some sense as you've done it, right? That in a sense the victim is tied by destiny to their oppressor.
Mm.
But I don't yeah, I don't know. I mean, I guess
I think that all the sort of philosophies that have the Hegelian origin story
yeah,
have this notion of that conflict has a resolution, and
yeah,
it's a resolution of divorce and isolation for the master, whereupon they have to like find some way to grow themselves because they've been too dependent upon others for too long. And I think it's a compelling story. I don't know if it's true. I mean,
yeah.
inclined to teleologize history, but it seems to fit.
Yeah, I don't know. I guess I'm more I like the Hegelian one where the death is the only option better, but I don't know why. I mean, I'm aware of arguments like ethics of care and even Seeger, yeah, I guess then even if it was true, then the question would be like if that's the cost, is it worth it, right? I mean, what kind of consciousness am I in possession of if if for currency it digested um defeats of other people, right? Fucking yuck, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, I keep thinking of the kind of earlier shift, and sorry if I'm jumping around from the feudal, but
You stop jumping.
I mean, that's my superstructure mind. It's like the shift from nomadic hunter-gatherer kind of type groups to agriculture, which is less healthy, more time working, but could hold like a larger population in one area.
Right.
And material conditions surely drove that change, because for a long time it wasn't just as if these groups learned about agriculture and was like, oh, this is great, like let's do this right now. It's like they
Right.
knew they were encountering groups that were either pastoralists or small scale agriculturalists, and
Yeah.
interacting with them and trading with them, and then eventually they had to take this up and they probably knew that it wasn't the best choice, and they probably resisted it as long as possible. But it seems like is every scale like a kind of a step down in a way, but a step down and a step up in some ways. Like capitalism, Marx even talks about the technological leaps and bounds.
Loves that shit.
There's
Yeah.
cost to it at the same time. And agriculture, yeah, had a lot of benefits, but a lot of cost to it at the same time.
Yeah.
So is this always going to be the case? Like even
I mean, I think evolutionary theory's pretty consistent on this idea that it's easier to lose an evolutionary advantage than to gain one. And that's because the conditions that create a unique advantage are less common than the disappearance of those, than the disappearance of advantage of scenarios in general. So I think at some point, you know, maybe it was an unwilling or a hesitant choice to become agriculturalists firmly, or maybe there was a very bellicose agriculturalist who was group that's surrounded by a bunch of non-agriculturalists, and at the time of famine, maybe they're the only ones that survived. That's a heck of a leg up, you know. Doesn't really much matter how it came to be. I mean, it's interesting or something, right?
Sure.
But it doesn't pertain to us anymore. And that's, I'm not saying that critically, just to say that that we do have the luxury of deciding what our ethics want to be, or what we want our ethics to be, on a social level. If civilization means anything at all positive, and not just you know, a smuggled in sequence of oppressions, then that's what it means.
Yeah, and you're right. There definitely was environmental pressure on a lot of groups to become agriculturalists. The ice age, climate change, whatever was happening at that time in the Levant. But yeah, I think it is relevant in some sense, in the same way we're talking about the feudal transition, that at least to think about there could have been alternative possibilities. We all could be anarcho-primitivist still, wander around nomadically, live in the van life without any vans.
Yeah, and so she comes here, she wants to talk about the commons now. And she says here, I think this is the struggle for the commons starting, but I think I jot down some ideas from before that in the commons, or the commons in the feudal era, serves as a coming together of the serfs, but also an ideological platform for communism. So there's of course, we talked about, there's certain forms of communal life are being experienced as this time in different spheres. She says that, but she cautions us not to romanticize this era of early feudalism, because she says that there are these tranches of the classes or proto classes, right? And we have modern versions of it. I was thinking about Russian peasantry at the turn of the century, like the kulaks, and then there are different sub-peasant classes of those. She says that, look, this was a hierarchical time, and it was a highly patriarchal time. And then from there, and I'll just stop after this, she says that, she says, however, the race relations were a lot more equal. And why? She says, because the division of labor was not valued in a hierarchy, since production and reproduction were intertwined. You need, like, there is an immediate need of what you do in the sphere of reproduction to production. I mean, you literally have to calculate your kind of what's going to be coming, what's going to be come out, right? Winter's coming. You can't go to fucking Costco or call Uncle Bob or nothing.
Right.
That collapse of distinction, which to her, and I think to a lot of us here, is a true kind of ontological move here, which and is great, I think, and it's true.
Mhm.
And even like literal reproduction with women, like if you're working a farm, you're like, we need to have lots of kids here to help us out.
No, that's exactly what I was saying. Yeah.
Yeah. And now,
So that's where we are here.
yeah, not just that Marxist kind of view of reproduction, like the worker needs to reproduce himself for the next day, but like literally having kids and the role of
Right.
women being important in the same sphere of class there.
But they
Whereas
don't have
now,
commodities though. So this is for use value. So this
Right.
would immediately serve your needs, right?
whereas now there's that separation and people don't think about, I need to, have children to make workers for, and we have, people, there's more and more childless
Right.
adults these days because you don't work. I mean, I'm working on a farm. I'm not gonna have any kids. I don't need them to do work for me.
Yeah, which is a distortion.
Yeah. I don't want to romanticize the sort of like hyper localness or something like that of a peasant's lot in the 1300s. But I think there is something valuable in having such close awareness of both production and reproduction and the total arbitrariness of that division. And that's that it's difficult to imagine, maybe there is some, but it's difficult to imagine a sort of profound corner of life that is shadow labor, or emotional labor, or all the other sorts forms of invisibilized labor that exist, which occupy so much energy. Sort of like a notion of care labor to care not only for children but elders, and have that be totally outside of the line of sight of the wage earner, right? Like that eyes on part of this period of history really makes it difficult. And the lack of, like, no one's clipping coupons. No one's like going through large informal networks to be able to arrange things that they can't afford.
No, absolutely not. No.
Right. Like all those kinds of labor are present and obvious, which I think builds a less effortful solidarity.
Yeah, we touched on that last time, the kind of Marxist feminist debates. Yeah, I think, yeah, it's not only aware and open, but it's also valued and not degraded as women's work or something that isn't central to the sphere of production and reproduction. Yeah, I didn't want to imply that it wasn't a thing, but that more like, you're right, that it's kind of been covered over or turned in or kind of shadowed in the way you were talking about through processes she talks about in the book.
Yeah, and from there we head into the struggle over the commons, and she wants to say that there are these specific characteristics about these events, about this era of feudalism. We're now in the kind of oscillating between 13th and 14th century, and we're jumped around very specific places. Modern day France, modern day Germany, and Italy. When she wants to talk about Britain, she comes and says specifically English or something. So she's talking about a very specific area in Europe. And so there's an intensification of class struggles, because as you remember, the serfs are starting to notice the lords or the nature of their relations very early on. And more laws are developed to manage these relations. Then there is the development in managerial models of the feudal to kind of to take care of these plots of lands and what people's functions are in there and blah 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 blah. And they also live there, of course.
Also rigorously codify what exchange looks like as part of that managerial model.
What is it?
To rigorously codify what exchange looks like, all these examples of You know, the
Oh
hen
yeah.
in front of a fence or gate. If frightened, has the strength to fly over or scramble over. The bailiff must accept her. She is fit, right?
Yeah,
But
yeah.
like,
And why was it for that? I love that
right,
part.
because otherwise I can deliver you a chicken wing and be like, you have to pay for the whole chicken, right?
Yeah.
All the sort of like
All
forms
your
of
sick animals.
cannibalism. Right, right,
Yeah.
right. I ate most of the bird, but there's a
On
little
the
bit
way.
there, you know. Yeah.
Yes, and this is both external and internal. So this is very important. So we're kind of losing out a lot of those autonomy of early on. And what Mark brought up about the, all these codifications and what they respond to, that's important because she always takes note of these kind of I hate to use these kinds of words, but these moments of resistance or something that become norms or cultural quips or tactics that the powerless use against the powerful in the places that they can exercise it. Of course, that's the Foucauldian inside her that's talking about that. And there's a development of tax codes. So there's something that is required of all of these, this mode of production, and then there is this recruitment of armies. I don't know why I put that down. Maybe one of you guys can refresh my mind here. I took notes that criminals are starting to be recruited to serve in the army because there is well, less and less people. Right? Of course, in the 14th century we have the plague, but I don't think we are there yet.
No, and that wouldn't be a problem on its own because your opposition would theoretically have less people too, right? As long as your ratio is on point, right? This is during the
12th century, I think.
Yeah, the plague really won the
Hundred
war.
Years' War, around the time of Battle of Agincourt. This is when Britain is beginning to like say that taxes must be paid in coin, can't be paid in kind. And it's all because of, well, a number of things.
Armies first. That's what Graeber, yeah.
Yeah. It's a refusal to debase their coinage so that they can't pay their armies, and because large portions of armies are mercenary armies,
Yeah.
and so that has this result of bringing peasants into the city because if they can't pay it in kind, they have to get a wage job.
Yeah.
But then it's also this apex moment of resistance, or what was the framework on that? The foot dragging, dissimulation, false compliance, feigned ignorance, desertion, pilfering, smuggling, poaching. It's like apex moment of all this where you muster 16,000 soldiers, only 7,600 show up, and then 3,000 are left a month later because everyone just runs away. Because where's the enforcement? Where's the, like, when the enforcers themselves are also deserting?
Right. Yeah, and that was the soldier part that I've forgotten. I've written here.
It's also very like this transition towards using criminals or criminality as a justification is, I think, a cornerstone of biopolitics.
Right, and she says also the inversion of tradition here. Yeah, which you already put down, I think. This for these these violations, develop these codes to regulate every minute habit of the peasants, especially in the 13th century. And from there, I have the schema for liberty and social division section. She says commutation here is to achieve. So contractualism and money exchange begins to chip away at the feudal relations as more autonomy is granted to both sides. For the vast majority of the peasants, this compelled a shift towards indebtedness, or shortage of crops resulted in borrowing towards the future. This is my own notes for I think a couple of pages. So maybe let's start here. There is this development in entering into contracts on both sides, and also exchange of money, which you already mentioned, that transition. But the contract part is very interesting because now you start having peasants hiring peasants to do peasant work. It's like the seeds of capitalism, you know, when it's like there's a company, Nike, then it's like, I'm gonna buy a company that makes shoes, but I'm gonna say I make shoes even though I only take care of a logo. And that company goes and buys, like, you know what I mean? And nobody ends up being like actually doing anything. Anyway, so that starts happening with these contractualism and the money thing. Do you guys want to talk about the I mean, you already talked about the indebtedness, Mark. Did you or James, or you guys want to talk about that?
No, well, no, I just wanted to point out the other thing she says before that, that the peasants were no longer able to differentiate between the work they did for themselves and that which they did for the landlords.
Right.
Yeah.
Really, we were talking about earlier with the making the beehive, thinking about the beehive and being a factory worker.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Right. Oh, yeah.
Like, again, the seeds of capitalism.
Right. And then the labor. Yeah, I love that. Yeah,
because we talked about that last week too, like the idea that now you don't know when you've worked. Oh, this was my 6 hours where I wage, and now the last 2 hours I'm making are just profit for the boss.
Right. And your consciousness of your own actions and what they do. That must be fucking devastating. That must be why we're here. Yeah, so then I wrote here, we see here the development of wage labor, the differentiation in labor, as James talked about, and compensation brings class conflict in a new form. So you had that idea of like the beginning of the conflict, right? Shit, I'm on your land, but you're doing your thing, I'm doing my thing. Situation seems to be pretty solid, but we keep an eye on each other. Then we went through some changes. Now we got contracts coming in, people paying each other. And when you can pay each other, there are people that can't pay. As it always happened, indebtedness increases all as such. And you got to say the nobility themselves are in debt, you know, and the peasants, the nobility and peasant to peasant. Anyway, so now the conflict is taking new, not a new form, but new content. It's aboutness is changing. Maybe it's just form is changing too, I guess, in a sense. And then by the 14th century, women too are in the cities as proletariats. So, oh yeah, so then there is with indebtedness, there is people going into towns, you know, you got the cities expanding and being built up, and you don't have industries yet. This is the 14th century, but you have trades and whatnot, and you have guilds, and you see already women here present. And these are the peasant women mostly that lived these fields and these situations, and they've come to the cities, and they have found themselves in within like-minded, interest-savvy, interest-aware groups of people, and sometimes the bonds are primarily around gender, and that's yeah, I don't know. That was a lot of kind of just schematics, but if there were comments or anything,
I guess the
or if I left out anything.
Bookmarking that she's heading towards a backlash, right? And
Yeah,
the backlash
struggle
from
for the
this,
breaches.
right?
Yeah.
Right, and the Fablio and the right and the struggle for the breaches, right? And the backlash is a historical rhyming point, as it were, as something that happens over and over and over. This is similar to like the Summer of Blood in, I think, 1921, the vast array of race riots in the United States in the early 1900s, as a result of trying to primarily trying to like defang unions, and allowing Black folks, mostly Black men, access to higher paying wage, right? And the backlash that they're experiencing, which is itself a response to a prior backlash that white workers are experiencing from getting too successful in the early 1900s labor movements.
Oh yeah. Yeah, compounding.
Right.
Yeah, and yeah, I mean, I see, we're doing history, we're kind of simplifying things, we're following a straight and narrow path here, but yeah, I don't know. It's this area is interesting because it seems like she's not the first person and she won't be the last to praise and trying to reinvigorate the historicism of Dark Ages to like, Jesus Christ, look what the Turks are starting to do and just everything everywhere. Well, there's so many moments of like freedom, possibility of actual class-based freedom, but these mechanisms always function well in changing interest in the true sense, fundamentally.
Yeah, we have an idea of this period as like boring, nothing changes really, but
Everyone's stupid.
Yeah, she points out that it's not a static system, and not if everyone's stupid and the peasants are the stupidest, and they don't even have an idea of freedom. They can't even think these things.
Right.
Yeah, she points out that it's not a static system, or wasn't a stable equilibrium by any means.
Yeah, while the responses to it might have been quite normal and repetitious throughout history, the specificity and the uniqueness of this moment is something to like pay attention to. Not only is there, what she's talking about on page 31 with Frankfurt and these guilds, but women in medical professions, but then specifically 16 female doctors, among them several Jewish women specialized in surgery or eye therapy. Like we're talking about the kinds of medicine that we don't even imagine existed at the time, right?
Yeah.
Like that there were specialists in them, and that there were specialists who were not, like not what we would normally imagine them to be. And similarly with the notion of the peasants are the stupidest, is that why would they need these incredibly specific processes of how a sale must be completed if the peasants were stupid? They're rules lawyering like someone who doesn't want to lose a board game. They're finding every loophole they can to say, like in page 28, we must remember the cotman of Elton, who admitted that they were bound to stack the Lord's hay in his meadow, and again in his barnyard, but maintained that they were not bound in custom to load it onto carts to be carried from the first place to the second.
We've all either had or known students who were smart enough to just do the assignment, but were wanted to like figure out a loophole around it because they were just that, that's they were whatever, for whatever reason, rebellious, didn't want to do it,
Yeah.
thought it was boring.
Yeah. So and here's where we get to the very interesting part, which I think Mark was very excited to talk about this. We're getting into the millenarians and the heretic movements in this. If you guys listen to Common Sense with Dan, whatever, because he does hardcore history, that dude, he did a 4-hour episodes on the Munster event and all that. So you can go check that out. Those are pretty cool historical events, a lot more complex than they appear here. But yeah. So here's what's going on in the 13th century, folks. It's a lot happening. You have uprisings because the antagonisms are getting hot here. You have the Crusades that have been going on for a couple of 100 years now. You have theologies that are assuming political forms and becoming part of political discourse. The popes, talking about how to declare war and what to do in times of war. And in 200 time, what I'm focusing on right now is this when the international laws are going to be developed. But and then early on in the 11th century, we had this development in the idea of churches, that they had become more transactional in nature and had then assumed economic forms. And of course, then the religion has also become more transactional since the 11th century to where we are at, knocking on the 14th century. But what she wants to say is that something very interesting happening here. It's called the heretic movement. And she wants to say it's like liberation theology, which is the Marxist Catholic form of Christianity that developed in South America. So anyone wants to say on this?
I think too that the church is becoming more hierarchical and closed.
Yeah.
And these movements represented kind of a people's type movement to theological movement, similar to liberation theology.
Yeah.
I think that the between the Crusades and the heresies, and those aren't those aren't necessarily distinct. I mean, we should remember that the Third Crusade is declared on southern France, Fourth Crusade, something like that.
Oh yeah, internal crusades, definitely, yeah.
Right. And there's I think in total the majority of them are declared on European regions, what would be considered to be European regions, and not nearly as many of them were against the caliphates. But between the two, we have this other part that I think Foucault is kind of missing out on when he historicizes biopolitics of this this turn towards what will become Christendom as a pan-European identity, and that doesn't track that well with a lot of people. Like my family is from Waldeck on the border of France and Germany near Trier, and we don't particularly think about ourselves as all that similar to other Germans. And I'm talking about an area the size of like a county in the US. Like national identity is still not super prevalent in the ways it is in the United States. In the United States, it feels like people genuinely feel like they have something in common with someone 3,000 miles away in a way that's just kind of nonsense, but is the roots are in this time where instead of having a hundred principality kingdom where everyone's in fighting amongst each other, not only does that fighting cease, but then East Francia and West Francia and Lotharingia and Lithuania and Sweden and all these other kingdom groupings are supposed to gather together to fight an even bigger threat, both the internal and the foreign.
Right.
And sort of like create an identity out of that, to forge one that will become the sort of the foundations of Europeanism, that will become the foundations of whiteness, that will become the foundations of the who has the right to colonize and who shall be colonized, these kinds of things.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a definitely more comprehensive version of that. And yeah, then we have here that she says that the laws yeah, so then you have, you know, we have to keep considering this presence of the church, which is, you know, as Mark said, very important here. But she says the laws start blurring distinctions between criminality and heresy and unruly behavior. So, you know, nuisance laws specifically, that's what we were thinking about. And she notes that the growing concern of the church with biopolitics, especially birth, is that now we have seen from 1347 till 1352, and I always know that because of the black metal band that has that name, is the year of the plague, that 1/3 of Europe dies. Y'all, that's, you know, there weren't that many people on Earth at that point, really. But just imagine everybody you know goes away in your town. That's basically what it felt like. The Mongols have just kicked the shit out of eastern part of Europe, and you know the Muslims were knocking on Spain's door from the western side. They were goddamn ruling Spain. What the hell is going on? There are, of course, the Crusades. Salah ad-Din just like kick the shit out of your boys, send them home. It's bad. Europe is just being pummeled for hundreds of years. Everyone's dying. Nobody knows what's going on. Just trash.
People are saying the world's going to end, and everyone else is like, "Yes, that's great."
I fucking hope so. It's gonna end. There are people that are writing in this time. You know, I saw this in grad school. Like, they cannot believe these fucking Mongols. You know, they're like, this has to be punishment for something. Like, if we don't know what we've done that is so bad, like, we need to figure this thing out, because we've committed a collective sin. Because those dudes, like, whatever they are, they cannot be real. So yeah, so it's kind of like this end of the world thing's been hanging around. But anyways, the church becomes obsessed with biopolitics because you need populations. Things are like, Europe is collapsing, if it hasn't already collapsed in some places. And yeah, so then that's what's happening now. If anybody else wants to any comments or anything.
Yeah, I mean, I would to do a fast summary on the different heresies.
Yeah.
I think memento mori, remember you have to die notion, and as she says on page 36, although she's speaking more specifically about the Bogomilists and the Cathars, it is widely applicable. this notion of mere life. The influence of the Bogomils on the Cathars is well established, and it is likely that the Cathars' avoidance of marriage and procreation stemmed from a similar refusal of life, quote, degraded to mere survival, rather than from a death wish or from contempt for life. And many of the well, all of the heresies have some notion of the church has lost its mandate from heaven, and usually these pressures you're highlighting, Sean, and a recognition of how humanity in Europe is just surviving are like the central driving factors. And then the heresies have their specific differences that are very important, but that's a much longer conversation.
Yeah, so of course the what happens to, because you already had the burgeoning kind of division between male and female in the city, with the serfs, it has already started. Now, because of the events that happened, the church is taking notice, and it wants to regulate the relations between sexes. And we have these distinctions that are already in hand in the current modes of production, and those are useful and non-useful, or productive or unproductive actions, right? So the actions of non-procreation, non-production enter into both kind of wages of sin and also codes of law, and those categories, of course, pop up, and we've mentioned this many times about the vagabond and the aloofness, the aloof people, or the people who are in the city that are not doing anything, that are not employed. Not that they're not doing anything, they might be doing the bunch of shit. Anyways, that is happening, and we're now in the 14th, kind of closing the 14th century, and there's this kind of these events kind of, as the city and the church are managing the serfs and the city, or the fields and the city and the commons, there starts being more movement between the spheres, and that results more in kind of the proliferation of masses in the cities, and then there's a conglomeration of the fields that are needed more to subsist the city, and the church and state are kind of coming close together. And I guess that's how I see the macro movements of that moment. And of course, we already mentioned this, but the labor crisis that was caused by the plague carries through European history up until the 16th century. People are still bitching about this, the lords and whatnot. But as we keep saying, this is that we're doing dialectic shit, as that massive death creates this era, and actually the possibility for a revolution again, a major revolution, a shift in history, because the workers are now precious, right? Because there weren't that many people in the world. Development of the world in the material sense caught on. there was a flu moment as we're almost talking about our own time. The workers become precious, they become more disobedient, they ask for shit, and they what does that turn out to? We already talked about this in earlier in this podcast, or whatever the hell this is. Class antagonisms flare up.
Yeah. Well, yeah, because I want to start with now then, because I was just listening to something about America First Pack, FPAC, and it's total Christian dominionism. Marjorie Taylor Greene was one of the speakers. So I see those connections there too, this rise of the church, or wanting the church to kind of
Neo-crusaderism.
take over
Yeah.
politics in that same way.
I mean, those symbolism are so big in the incel men's rights shit, right? The crusader outfit.
Yeah.
And I was like, dude, you know what happened, right? You know, like it's
Same thing that happens to an incel.
yeah.
Yeah, and I wanted to say too that
Chad.
one of the main causes for the Black Plague was packing people into cities and not having running water and proper hygiene.
Yeah. Just being like, please fuck a lot.
Yeah.
Well, we're not gonna take care of all
Throw
the other
your
needs.
shit out the window.
Literally, yeah. I guess one thing we didn't mention is that I guess we kept touching upon it, but I want to put, so the commons are still there, folks. Like there's still struggle over the commons is happening. People doing even illegal enclosure of commons at that point, or rather acts that are not in their jurisdiction, if you will. But there are also mass amount of uprisings of people taking over cities, of cults that compel kings to raise armies. Like we were talking about major like orgy sex, and we're talking about just a lot of things happening. There's nothing dark, there's nothing uneventful about it. The only reason I skip those when I talk about the history parts that she's putting down is that I don't know much about them other than what I've just told you, or a few podcasts I've listened to. But if anyone wants to talk about that, especially in relation to genders in that time, that's relevant to the book. Yeah.
I mean, I guess two things. One, I want to respond to you, James, and say, and you, Sean, in this, and say that this notion of the enclosures is alive and well. Like it's the legitimate the rationale given for the Bundy Malheur occupation is fundamentally a re-enclosure of a common by a private group or something like that. And the initial incident that caused it was a failure to recognize a sense of national enclosure of a common. And then, with regard to gender, I think, again, not trying to naturalize it, too much, just to say that the church became positively obsessed with legislating every conceivable form of disorder. How do I want to frame this? I want to say that the reason why this ends up being such a biopolitical shift is that the church, their answer for everything is to individualize public disorder onto the criminal, the deviant, onto women in particular, tying this back to the events in the garden.
Modalities of body. I mean, this is what Foucault talks about, right? I mean, he uses the writing in this period. I think she mentions this. Sorry, Mark. Yeah.
You're good. Go ahead.
Yeah, every acts of sexuality, like how they are, and what is their punishment is. And of course you again have that transactionality, and with transactionality you have indebtedness. And one thing we didn't kind of mention is that um she talks about this event. Now this must be a controversial claim. I need to look more into this, see what's this about. She's saying that around this time, when there is still this solidarity between these classes that are making advances because of the plague, there is this decriminalization of rape.
Mhm.
Because there was already need from certain sects of the male workers who were envious of the the women of the wealthy, which they had no access to, and they couldn't get married because they didn't have a field no longer. They were in the city. You have nothing but debt. You don't even know if you have food tomorrow. And she's saying that that leads to events of gang rape, and gang rape turns into a form of interclass war. When women are raped, they're less likely to be able to, or be allowed to rather, function or serve a function in society, or at least you do, but nothing that is valued. So you are systematically pushed to the lowest parts of that class, and you serve kind of as the reserved army, which Marx had also talked about. So it was through that mechanism, which starts with the instrumentality of rape. You're talking about at least one of the causes that creates this, breaks this equal conversation into a subservient one. And that is the kind of the gender structure of the working class, developing working class, as it's going towards the capitalist revolution, which is bad because it's carrying a seed of inequality, and we know what happens to those seeds in the dialectics. Yeah.
Beyond that, it's not even for the women who had it happen to them, but just that threat, threat of
Right.
violence with men, and it being sanctioned to some extent by the state and the church, really would kind of crush women's the autonomy that they were gaining at the time in the cities. You know, they can't leave home alone. They can't work at certain times or certain places.
Yeah.
We also have a need for historical rupture when talking about rape, because contemporary notions of rape are these interpersonal crimes. But the dominant form of rape was as a weapon of war and a reward for a warrior for a very long time. And, there's all sorts of ways to dress it up, like she speaks earlier in there, but just jus prima nocta, right? Like systematic rape of the Lord on the first night of a wedding.
Yeah. By the Lord of the first.
By the Lord, right? Of the, yeah. And, those are means to be able to culturally outbreed, which is why they are weapons of war. So by offering this as a viable option to the men of a particular city or body politic or something like that, you are drafting them as a soldier in your army. That's part of the historical understanding piece on that. And then the other piece is that I think historically what's happening here is that we're creating femininity and masculinity as we will see them today.
That's what I was, yeah. Yeah, there is definitely, I mean, one thing that is, oh Jesus, what was it? It's almost like a valve also, because it's kind of is diffusing some pressure in this actual class war, and is directing it like it's shooting off course, you know. I mean, it's like any sorts of ism. Like you look at, really, it is that simple. I mean, highly complex and very simple. I mean, you look at racism from the moon with binoculars, like all you see is that like the working class is losing, you know, like this, like that would be its DNA. Like that is the only thing it is there to do. And it works real well. But yeah, it enters in this form, and again, this is like our conversation about slavery, right? It's like patriarchy, yeah, man, existed for forever, but like what Sarah and Abram, you know, fight over, or the modality of that relationship, like that patriarchal sense, the content totally different, right? The form I accept, but the content is very different, or maybe the form is different too. I don't know, whatever.
That's gonna be your tagline. The form is the same, content different, or maybe the form's different too. Really, you're negating yourself as we speak.
I don't know. I get caught up. I also, yeah, I had an edible before this conversation, so I'm really feeling it. Yeah, so then we go to sexual politics, the rise of the state and counter-revolution. I don't know. I skipped some of the sections that I didn't think needed to be gone over. So we have this, again, we have a turning of a valve, we have a laxing of laws regulating sexual mores, and then we have male pluralitarian eternal violence against women. So that you know, now that the men have took over this managerial subversion rule, the laws again lax, right? Because last time we are talking about laws going up because the church was taking notice, and this is the place where also you see occupations like prostitution, urban prostitution, a very specific type of prostitution, where they become totally legal and actually seen as public service because they take care of the masses. And here, um, and then they also function as brothels. These brothels also function as and prostitution as also a valve to turn down that male aggression that started this ordeal to begin with, which was a male aggression when it realized that it was in a lower class and didn't have access to certain privileges, such as women. Now these men can go and get their women for 20 minutes or whatever.
Right. I think
and
it's the part that
yeah.
you were talking about this, James, of the threat of the rape being a very operational part of the power of this. And I think it's also the betrayal it reveals that the solidarity was always a lie. Now, the solidarity wasn't a lie. It was retrospectively created as a lie, but by virtue of this betrayal action. And I think that's always the function of these, of something like racism or something like that, that its emergence when it shows up is, a crushing of hope and a rising of I was stupid to have ever hoped.
Yeah. Yeah, their power in defeating self-interest. I mean, that is not to be
Right. I mean, that's why we call it biopower or biopolitics. At its core is that like you are policing yourself. And in order for you to police
It's
yourself,
discipline. Yeah.
yep.
Yeah, that's why it's different
by
than
your own
punishment.
by your own emotions, by your own hopes and dreams. Everything you do has to fail because of your own being a failure, and then you will be perfectly policed.
Yeah, yeah. Which I mean, to me, it's never been much different than kind of Freud's the super ego. I mean, it's the social version. It's your social gaze of yourself, right? I mean, like where I am in the matrix of living culture, and then you just fix yourself. And I think, say whatever you want about like how Foucault like comes up with this differentiation between punishment and discipline, but goddamn is it true? Like the way he discusses it. But yeah, I mean this type of discipline does sit in, and this is the last thing I have to say about this chapter, really. And she's setting up for the chapter to come, is that now you have this thing that I don't think we have mentioned it once while talking. Maybe we have. That was watching over us. There was a specter haunting this podcast this whole time, looking over this city. We have this new emergence. The nation state, the tiny idea of the state, which is that suddenly you have groups and collections, units of this society that was just these bubbles standing close to each other to think for them as a whole in order to organize them. And one of the functions that this thing has is this management of the sexes, rather the genders, for the purpose of social peace, social equilibrium.
And it's inaugurated in multiple betrayal experiences, not only the one that we already talked about of the gang rape, but also the multiple times in which the bourgeoisie align themselves with the nobility in order to suppress the workers when this nation state is born out of the I don't know what to call it, something like proto-democratic idea that these cities are supposed to represent. Right, they're supposed to represent workers and skilled laborers who are the burghers are supposed to be collecting together. These free states are supposed to be collecting together in order to resist the power of the nobility, until you get this moment of eye blight, where the people in power in the cities, in the free states, recognize that they have more in common with the nobility, and they inaugurate the nation state project in class warfare, by realigning with the people they were supposed to be in opposition to.
Mark did mention the nation state earlier, so he did.
Damn, we give it away. It was an Easter egg.
Mm-hmm. That's
Yeah.
true.
And I just stepped right on that egg.
Damn it, James. My memory is fragile now, and you step right in there. God damn it.
These two lines in the book, though, one is page 43, says, defeated by impressive coalition of forces, including the prince, the nobility, the clerics, and the bourgeoisie, the weavers, who are in uprising at this moment, tried again in 1378, when they succeeded in establishing with what some exaggeration perhaps has been called the first dictatorship of the proletariat in history. Right, that is what these free states are rhetorically positioning themselves again. And then again, at the very last paragraph of the chapter, we have, for in the peasants and the democratic weavers and cobblers of the cities, the bourgeoisie recognized an enemy far more dangerous than the nobility, one that made it worthwhile for the burghers even to sacrifice their cherished political economy.
Oh yeah, I guess that the did we talk about the bourgeois? I guess
No,
we did, and we'll talk about it next time.
yeah, we probably need to spend some effort on talking about how the rosters of the bourgeoisie look a whole lot like the rosters of the nobility, things like this. Yeah,
Is that in this chapter?
I think that's in the next chapter.
Next chapter. Okay.
I'm
I was like,
failing to
"Yeesh."
remember exactly where it is, but it's an important part of the discussion for sure.
Most definitely, yeah, man. Well, I think we well, I don't know. Does anybody have anything else to say? Because I have tapped out my notes here.
No, yeah, no, I think covered a lot of it. Yeah, like
Well, anything we missed, you
Mark said,
wanna?
it ends right on the kind of pre-birth of the nation, the absolute state, even.
Right.
Yeah,
what
but
she
I feel like the
said about
absolute state, then we have to wait till like the 18th century.
or even like, yeah, or like Louis XIV or whichever king that was, one of the Louis.
I think
The Napoleon marks the.
one thing I would bring up is this notion of the function of slavery in this time period,
Yeah.
the broad time period of the witch hunts, is that it's especially in resolving the scarcity of labor crisis, is there to mitigate the shock of uprising, that the strikes aren't fully general strikes so long as there's a large labor pool that can be forcibly extracted from. And I want to bring this up to talk about how it's different than now. And that's that contemporary like neocolonialism performs these functions, right? Now we offshore the labor to a place that's over there, wherever over there is. And then as soon as over there gets enough accrued wealth, the capital endeavor withdraws from there to move to another place that's poor. And the resulting, like, that's not enough time for a place to actually build infrastructure. So the withdrawal itself creates the conditions by which the capital class can move right back to where they used to be. They might have to give it a generation, but they can rotate between 4 countries, go from Taiwan to Thailand to Namibia and then back or something like that.
Yeah.
Yeah, and this is something that you touched on earlier, Mark, that like this ongoing, and we talked about last week, the ongoing process of primitive accumulation, enclosing spaces, appropriating people, and exploiting people, and
Yeah. I mean, how is this is of course going on right now. I mean, both at home, with native land, and I mean, you look at Amazon, and just, I mean, of course there's all these indigenous struggles, but certainly you always have an industry behind that is pushing for that conflict, and it just doesn't seem to be ending. I mean, I even was thinking about all these kids making these just creative TikToks or sad or whatever, just creating content. And like there are people that are just like sitting on their ass, just cha-chinging out of that, like not doing anything. Like that is also a form of accumulation, except it's not primitive at all. It's
Right.
just dispossessing you.
Yeah, like again, it makes me want to read that book, Mackenzie Wark, Capital is Dead. Is this something worse? Because that's what she's talking about. This new kind of capital. Like she wants to say it's not capitalism necessarily, something different. She just doesn't want to add an adjective to it.
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's not just patronage capitalism or something like that, right?
Patreon.
Yeah.
Right.
Anyways, like to subscribe, send us money.
Patreon democracy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then it's a small note, but I just want to express something on this page 41 when they're talking about the occupation of which heresy is this? We get a glimpse of the popularity of the heretics from the trials and the Inquisition, which was still conducting in the 1330s in the Trento region of northern Italy against those who had given hospitality to the apostolics, when their leader, Fra Dolcino, had passed through the area 30 years before. At the time of his coming, many doors had opened to give Dolcino and his followers shelter. Again in 1304, when announcing the coming of the Holy Reign of Poverty and Love, Dolcino set up a community among the mountains of the Vercellis in Piedmont. The local peasants, already in revolt against the Bishop of Vercelli, gave him their support. For 3 years, the Dulcinians resisted the Crusades and the blockade the bishop mounted against them, with women in male attire fighting side by side with men. In the end, they were defeated only by hunger and by the overwhelming superiority of the forces the church mobilized against them. On the day when the troops amassed by the Bishop of Vercelli finally prevailed upon them, more than 1,000 heretics perished in the flames, or in the river, or by the sword, in the cruelest of deaths. Dulcino's companion, Marguerite, was slowly burned to death before his eyes because she refused to abjure. Dulcino himself was slowly driven among the mountain roads and gradually torn to pieces to provide a salutary example to the local population. And on the one hand, I want to say, like, props to them for holding out against an impossible force for 3 years. And on the other hand, like, one of the charges was direct consort with the devil for Dulcino. And I can only imagine being in that mode and just saying, like, you're lucky it's not true, because if I had the ability to do something right now, I would fucking do something right now.
Well, you notice how the marginalized are kind of described in some way. They're, just think of like the immigrant. He is lazy, doesn't want to work, but somehow will steal all of your jobs, like steal
Right.
marry your daughter and do all this crazy stuff and take over the government. Somehow get your job, not work, and then get welfare checks too.
Yeah. And so those sound like roots of fascist ideologies there, and the sort of echo notion of strong and weak at the same time.
Yeah, totally. I just got I got it a few months ago, but Origins of Totalitarianism. I've been wanting to read that too.
Oh, I'm reading that for school right now. For the second time. It's I mean, like
jump to the totalitarianism part, like forget all this other stuff,
the anti-Semitism book in there is fucking amazing, because she goes over some of the same events, except she's talking about how our Jewish people are fitting in these events. Anyways, but you have to listen to our Origin of Totalitarianism. I would definitely do a podcast on that with you, but it will be like 200 episodes. I don't know, because it's like 500 pages, right? Somewhere.
Yeah.
It's 3 books. In one.
Yeah, it's
Oh Jesus. Yeah, I'm reading it right now.
Anti-Semitism. We could just do them in a series. We'll do anti-Semitism, I think it's imperialism and totalitarianism.
Yeah, because she's saying that they're hand in hand. All right. Well, if nothing, I'm gonna conclude this. Anyone want to say anything? Last words, reflections, thoughts, aspirations? No? Okay.
Listen, look for my podcast, Unknown Reasons. Sometimes Mark's on there.
Okay. Unknown reasons. How do we find this?
You just have to kind of go to the right places. Go under a bridge somewhere. No, I think it's on. It should be on all the podcast catchers. I don't put a lot of effort into marketing it. I would like it to be something.
Unknown reasons, man. Find it wherever. It might be there, it might be not. Mark's there apparently.
Yeah,
Some
it might
shit.
not be there because I don't pay for it, so the episodes fall off.
I didn't know it existed. I've known this dude for
Yeah,
like 10 years.
right now your Spotify cache is just your most recent one, the 9 Negro Teeth of George Washington. This is a great episode though. So
Yeah. I gotta go listen to these. Put them all on YouTube.
I should, yeah.
Mark, do you want to plug anything?
no,
No.
just same unknown reasons.
Awesome. Unknown reasons. Yeah, I endorse unknown reasons. Come to us every week. I'll be doing, hopefully I'll do it Simone de Beauvoir with Sean for you tomorrow. So come back for that, Mom. This was awesome.
Yeah.
Bye.